as in operation. The biggest uncertainty comes from Japan. When we think of a nuclear power plant as in operation, the reflex is to say, well, it must be a power plant that generates electricity. In operation means it's operating, it's running, so it generates electricity. However, especially in Japan, not only, but especially in Japan, there are officially still 50 nuclear reactors that are in the statistics as in operation. Like the Japanese government only officially closed 4 units at Fukushima Daiichi. Daiichi means 1, Fukushima 1. And all the others are in the statistics as in operation. However, they don't generate electricity. There's only 2 nuclear reactors currently in Japan generating electricity. That's 2 reactors in Oi. The green dots here. The other reactors are either impacted, those are in red, by 311, either directly or indirectly by political decision. So we, facing this situation, we made 3 scenarios. Our baseline scenario is that we consider, and that's sort of the very least, we consider the 10 Fukushima reactors are shut down for good. There's no chance that they will ever get back online. The second scenario we call the East Coast scenario, which considers that the other reactors in red impacted by the events of 311 will not be put back into operation. That is Onagawa, that was closest to the epicenter, was actually closer to the epicenter than Fukushima. There is Tokai, which is only about 100 kilometers from Tokyo, which is still a lot further than the Taiwanese reactors are from Taipei. But it seems difficult politically to put back into operation today the Tokai reactor because of its proximity with Tokyo. And there are 3 reactors at Tamaoka, which have been ordered shut down by the former Prime Minister Naoto Kan, because post-Fukushima, the new probabilistic assessment has identified an over 80% chance of a beyond design basis earthquake until 2030. So it was considered, well, a precautionary principle, it's reasonable to take them offline. So that's our East Coast scenario. And then we have another scenario which we call the German scenario, which would take off the grid, maintain off the grid, the reactors that have been in operation for over 30 years. Why German scenario? That's exactly what the German government did after 311. It's a single criteria decision. They decided to take off the grid immediately the reactors, the 8 reactors that were in operation for over 30 years. It's a decision which can be debated. Is one criteria enough? I don't know. There's other criteria that should play into a decision on safety. However, that's what the German government did. And those reactors were remained shut down. So if we do that, we have another 12 reactors that would be shut down. So that's 12 plus 7, another 19 units that would go offline from those 429. So we're in a situation then with 410 reactors. Still, it seems kind of optimistic because the Japanese debate is currently so difficult that for every restart attempt, there's vast demonstrations and public opposition. So I consider this as an extremely conservative scenario. However, what we're interested here is rather than absolute figures, I'm really interested in trends. What is going up, what is stable, what is going down. That is the main exercise here. Because we can discuss forever each single figure, but we cannot discuss the trends. It's either up or down or stable, it's big or small. So we are anywhere around 400, which brings us, this level brings us back to the 1980s. So that's the current state of the nuclear power programs in the world. Now, in the absence of major new build programs around the planet, the average age of the nuclear reactors in operation is increasing quickly and steadily. So this is the what is called the age pyramid. So we have the number of reactors here and the age, that means the number of years that they have been in operation on the horizontal axis. So we find our two waves again, right? The startup wave from the 70s and the startup wave from the 1980s. They are moving constantly towards the 40-year operational age. And we have now 20 reactors that are already beyond 40 years operational time. We have another 155 in total that have been operating for over 30 years. Now, for any kind of technical equipment, 30 years is a very long period of time. I mean, think of cars or think of other equipment, what these things actually looked like, 30 years ago. Well, a lot of you are not even 30 years old, which is actually nice to have a lot of young people here. But you won't even remember them. It would be even more difficult. But it looks like ancient age, right? 30 years old, 30-year-old technology. So it's a substantial age. And even on average, it's now standing at 27 years. So it's a very high average age. That's not really doesn't really sound like a dynamic, young, modern technology. If we look at the same picture that we've seen on a worldwide scale, we look at it from a perspective of the European Union, we get a similar pattern that an uninterrupted increase until the end of the 1980s. But then it's quite different. The peak, like the historic absolute peak, was already reached in 1988. So almost 25 years ago. And from then on, there was basically a downward trend. This downward trend has been ongoing since then, and it was only accelerated by the events of 3/11. Not triggered, just accelerated. And that's really one of the important messages of this trend analysis. Is this decline trends, at best stagnation in many countries, the decline has been ongoing for many years. And the overall number of reactors now in the European Union, with 132, is 45 units less than at the end of the 1980s. 45 units less. It's always to be compared. If you read in the newspaper about a reactor that is under construction in France and another one in Finland, those are the only two new construction sites that have opened over the past 10 years. These numbers, two reactors, have to be compared to 45 that have been taken off the grid. 45 less that are operating than before, so many more have been actually taken off the grid. So this whether there's another 2 reactors or 4 or 10 doesn't even change at all the overall trend. And that's what I'm interested in, that's the overall trend. Now, we've seen the numbers of reactors and actually also the installed capacity, which is the line here, which doesn't really follow exactly the same shape as the shape of the numbers of reactors. It's essentially for 2 reasons. One is that units that came online, so that replaced a reactor, were in general larger than the ones that were shut down. So you get an increase in capacity with the same number of nuclear reactors operating. But there's another effect that has not raised that much public attention, that is so-called operating. It means that you increase the installed capacity of an existing nuclear power plant by technical means. It can be work on the steam generators or on the turbine or on other levels. So it's like putting a turbo into a car, or change the motor, or increase the diameter of the cylinder. It's an existing technical framework, increase the power level. That can be significant, like over 20% increase in capacity can be reached that way, which incidentally raises also some safety issues. If you have a car that goes 20% faster than the original design, that has some implications, right? So you better have the right tires and the right brakes. What we see here now is the after the numbers of reactors and the installed capacity, we have the production of nuclear electricity. So this is from over the past 20 years. We see an increase for the same reason, increased capacity that has continued to grow with stagnating numbers of reactors, with a peak in 2006. So the historic production of nuclear electricity was a lot later than the historic peak of numbers of reactors, numbers of reactors. So, but again, we had a declining trend already from then on, and not only through Fukushima. Even if this last year's decline between 2010 and 2011 is obviously linked to the events of 3/11. It's basically the effect from the German program and the Japanese program that led to that effect. The other level which we hadn't looked over the long term at was the relative share of nuclear power in overall electricity generation. And that came pretty much as a surprise that the maximum level of nuclear power in the world electricity grids was reached already in 1993 with 17%. That's almost 20 years ago. I mean, that's a long time ago. And since then, there was a slow decline, slow and permanent decline with a steep decline the last year for the obvious reasons. So we're standing now at about 11%. So it's always the same message. We had a certain development pre-Fukushima that was accelerated through the event of 3/11. This is now the nuclear electricity generation by country. There's 31 countries generating nuclear electricity. First point that is remarkable is we don't have a sort of a spread out nuclear generation phenomenon at all. We have a concentration on a very small number of countries that generate the largest amount of nuclear electricity in the world. Historically, it's always been the big six, like United States, France, Russia, Japan, South Korea, Germany, that have been generating between 2/3 and 3/4 of the nuclear electricity in the world. In fact, if you look at the two largest producers, the United States and France, if you combine them together, they generate half of the electricity in the world, two countries. France alone generates about half of the nuclear electricity in the European Union. So it's by no means a sort of a worldwide phenomenon that is spread out equally. It's some countries that have a very large share of nuclear electricity generation. The other point which is interesting is if you look at big countries like India that generates less electricity than Belgium, like a tiny country like Belgium generating more nuclear electricity than entire China. Or the Ukraine generates more nuclear electricity than Belgium, than India, and Ukraine than China. So there's no relationship with the size of the country or the population of the country neither. If one tries to look a little bit into the future, the first criteria to look at is the numbers of units under construction. Currently, in our statistics, we have a 59 at the 1st of July. It's one of those typical illustrations. If I had chosen just to show the development from 2005, and actually some people do that, then it shows a very significant increase over the past few years of nuclear construction sites. It's basically twice as many than in 2005. However, this would not allow to identify the fact that in 2005, the number of units was so low that it hadn't been paralleled since the early age of nuclear power development. And at that time, the industry wasn't able at all to cope with replacement of shut down nuclear power plants. So it's like a little bit of a recovering that took place, and still less than what is needed to maintain the status quo. The other point which is important is that you see this huge development that took place very early, and it's like the largest level was at the end of the 1970s. The largest number of reactors in the statistics as under construction. Now, under construction, we always put it in quotation marks because people imagine always that it means that a unit will eventually go into operation. If it is under construction, that means it will be finished at some point and it will go into operation. Well, maybe not. It's as uncertain as with nuclear power plant number 4 in this country, right? Will it go into operation or not? The bets are open, right? I mean, nobody really knows. It's uncertain. And by experience, a lot of nuclear power plant projects have been actually abandoned at various stages of advancement. Could have been very early. In fact, a lot of reactor orders have been withdrawn before construction starts, and a lot of constructions have been abandoned, as I said, at very early, or when it was already completely finished. There's a few examples where reactors were ready to load fuel and they were abandoned for political reasons or for safety-related reasons or for economic reasons. So of this number here, 48 of the highest number, 234, 48 have never been actually connected to the grid. And we have seen this phenomenon all over those years, even if it is a declining phenomenon over the past 15 years. The most recent example is earlier this year, when the Bulgarian government announced that they would drop 2 reactor constructions in the country that had been in the statistics for 25 years. 25 years under construction and then abandoned. Right? That's also not extremely efficient from an investment point of view, I would say. Now, who's building? There's only one country that is massively building, that is China, with 26 units of the 59 under construction. Russia with 10, India with 7, and South Korea with 3. All the other countries have maximum 2 units at the same time under construction. The other point that is remarkable here is that some of these dates are really ancient, right? 1985, 85, well, we have 1999 in this country, 86, 87, 81, was a record holder in the United States, 1972. 40 years of construction. That is probably the all-time world record. Very difficult to beat. I would say, you know, there should be a doctoral thesis on the history of this project, or several theses. One on the cost development, one on the construction development, one on the political decision making. It's a beautiful case study, right? 40 years of nuclear power plant project. Now I have it in here with 2013 planned grid connection. That's already outdated. It's now either 2015 or 2016. One would think that after such a long time, the project managers are capable to predict at what price, what cost, they can actually finish this project and at what time, in what time frame. Well, it seems still very difficult, and the learning curve is not finished here. So we don't know whenever it will be put into operation. We have then looked at this phenomenon of construction times, because it's obvious, right? It strikes your mind if you look at the figure. So we have looked at average annual construction time from the beginning of the nuclear age. So we looked at a given year, the number of nuclear power plants, and we looked what the total construction time was, and we calculated the average construction time of these units. Now the first, I should add, the size of these balls represent the number of units that have been put into operation in a given year. So there is a clear trend. We always get back to this. There's a clear trend, upwards, but a clear trend until the end of the 1980s. Relatively large balls and a very clear increasing trend. But after the 1980s, there's sort of an explosion took place. After that, it's pure anarchy. There's no reason in the game anymore. It can be very high average, and it can be relatively low. In fact, the two reactors that went into operation this year in South Korea, by the way, the only ones, South Korea is the only country in the world that actually started up nuclear power plants in 2012. Not even China started up a nuclear reactor since the 25th of November 2011. That's remarkable too. It shows to what extent the program has been frozen. And these construction times are very low. The average is 4.4 years. That's an extremely good result compared to the overall experience of construction times. However, nobody's really capable to explain why the Korean industry has been able to build these reactors so fast. And I've been discussing this with Korean industry people as well. I mean, there's just the data is not on the table, so we don't really know. It's kind of an enigma. How did they do this? And it's very difficult to draw any lessons from that experience. If you see the year before was a record year in the other direction, right? The average was 14 years for a total of 7 units. Average 14 years for 7 units that were started up. Gives you an idea what is the individual construction times are. Now, another point, one of the points that are derived, one of the trends that can one derive from these increasing construction times, it has obviously a huge impact on cost. Because the longer the construction time, the longer I have to borrow money. And every delay in the construction project means a lot of additional financing costs that are added on to the project. Now, in other areas, we have what we call, in many areas, it's just a phenomenon which we call technology learning curves. And it's something where the specific costs, in this case, we have like several renewable energy generating costs for electricity. We always get a kind of a downward trend. Like over time, the specific costs go down. It's not very surprising, right? I mean, it's by experience, with innovation, with economies of scale, the specific costs have a downward trend. The curves look differently, right? In some cases it goes faster, in others it takes more time. So the shape of the curves is varies. But the overall trend is downwards. Now if we look at the nuclear curve, it goes up. So reactors become more and more expensive rather than becoming less and less expensive. This is true even for a country like France, which you can call France the nuclear dreamland, because like for 5 decades there was a very stable support policy for the nuclear industry. There was no interruption. Whatever government was in, the nuclear programs had the full support of government and the economic circle. So even in this country, the most expensive reactor was the last one that came online and was started up. So there's a very clear increasing trend in the specific investment. There's many reasons to this. On one hand, obviously, a reason is that the safety requirements were constantly increased. So safety-related investment became more expensive. But it's also, for example, that the French have been building reactors under Westinghouse, U.S. Westinghouse license for most of their reactors. And the last 4 were basically franchised reactors, adapted. And that raised a huge amount of additional technical challenges, which are not foreign to the trend in costs. We have looked at in more detail at the cost estimates of the so-called EPR, which is the European pressurized water reactor. In the US, it's called the evolutionary power pressurized water reactor. We call it the European problem reactor, EPR, the European problem reactor. When you look at the cost estimates, those are cost estimates over the past 10 years, only from official sources, like the industry ministry, the utility that is building, Arriva is the industrial builder, industry ministry, utility, the Court of Accounts, which is part of the institutions in France, and the utility. If you look at the specific investment costs, even if you deflate it, so if you take into account inflation and you transform it into 2012 euros, you end up with a cost estimate increase of over a factor of 4. That's a huge increase over a relatively limited time for a reactor project. What is very important to stress is that it's this assessment, this early assessment, that actually leads to an investment decision, right? So it's the low estimate that has the effect to convince politicians to vote in favor of the nuclear power option. And then it turns out to be over 4 times more expensive in reality. And this is not finished, right? None of these reactors are actually operating. So it's rather obvious that this is not the end of the line. It rather will cost more than less. If we look at electricity generating cost estimates, it's the same thing, right? I mean, it was estimated at 28.4 euros in 2001. I love the precision, 28.4. It's not 28.3 or 0.5, no, it's 28.4. And if you look at the current estimate, the margin, 110 to 166, is much larger than the total cost estimate in the beginning. I mean, that's not really an illustration of a mastering of the domain, right? I mean, it's rather a lack of cost control that you can derive from this piece of information. The other area which is interesting and important for any investor is credit rating. Now, what is credit rating? The credit rating agencies, and there's three main ones, Fitch, Moody's, and Standard & Poor's, they rate countries and companies according to their performance. Now, the performance that can be, their investment strategy, the profit margin they have, they have their own criteria they look at. And they look at, in their global note, they look at the environment in which a company is actually evolving. You can imagine if it's a state-owned company and the country is rated AAA, which is the highest note of Standard & Poor's, it's a very different situation as if you have a private company that is fully exposed to risk and doesn't have a state, good, well-rated state in the background that would never let a state-owned company go bankrupt. So the credit rating agencies take that into account when they give their notes, their global notes. Now, I said AAA is the best note for Standard & Poor's. There's no AAA of the number of selected large nuclear companies, mainly utilities plus one builder, Arriva. There was a double A, TEPCO. TEPCO had the best note of Standard & Poor's credit rating note until 311. This is really important because TEPCO was a company that was considered very secure investment, not necessarily paying huge dividends. So it was not an investment which was for speculators, but it was rather for modest people, right? For people that put a bit of money aside, that had a little bit of money and they had a few shares, or they had, they put their savings into secure investment. Now that investment was basically destroyed 311. The shares of TEPCO lost about 94%. So there's nothing left. So even modest people basically lost their investment in this disaster. So today TEPCO is junk. Right? It's what you call junk. So it's highly speculative. So if you buy this, if you buy TEPCO shares, you like risk. Right? Nobody knows what's happening. More surprising is that Arriva, the national 85% French state-owned company, largest builder, largest nuclear fuel company in the world, is just one notch above junk in the global note. And in fact, if you look at the company performance, what they call the standalone credit profile, it's already deep in junk. And it's only one notch above highly speculative. So that's remarkable, right? And it illustrates, the origin of this is the European problem reactor, where they lost at least 3 billion euros. And it's a number of other bad investments and bad management decisions. Now, it is here's a quote from another credit rating, a couple of quotes from another credit rating agency, Moody's, on nuclear power. Like on one hand, they say that a nuclear project is the kind of project which can push the a utility over the edge. So it can be just the kind of project which really tips it into a disastrous situation. On the other hand, the credit rating agencies consider credit positive a withdrawal of nuclear projects. So when, for example, two German utilities pulled out of investment projects in the UK, the credit agency said, that's a good decision. I mean, that's actually credit positive. And it's articulated like that. It's not only somewhere in the numbers, it's actively articulated, as you can see. And the same is true for the situation for Siemens that pulled out of nuclear power in 2011, announced pulled out of nuclear power. Again, it's considered credit positive because it frees up funds that Siemens can redeploy in businesses with better visibility. Like it's a better visibility means you know when projects are finished, you know what they cost, and you can determine what the economic risk is. Now, an obvious consequence of this is that the overall investment in competitors of nuclear power has increased phenomenally over the last 10 years. When we see here between 2004 and 2011, investments in new renewables, when we use the term new renewables, it means that it excludes all large hydro dams. They're not considered in this. They're actually, by many people, not considered renewable energy at all, because their detriment to the environment is so high. So here we have a factor 10 increase over a very limited number of years. Whereas for nuclear investments, there's actually no database. There's no international database for nuclear investments. So what we did is we looked at the construction starts in those years, and we allocated the investment that was estimated for a given project that started construction, and we allocated it for that year, which is not realistic because you spend not all the money in the first year. It's spread out over the years. So it's a very it's a maximum, it's over reality assessment. But even if you do that, you see that the level is extremely low compared to renewable energy investments. Who are the main investors? Until the end of 2010, China was the largest investor. China invested in 2010, again, this is pre-Fukushima, right? It's not after, it's before. China invested about 5 times more in renewable energies than in nuclear in 2010. Since then, last year, it's the US that has taken over as the largest investor. There's some new players, a little unexpected. Italy has boosted its investments from 6 to 28 billion. That's a phenomenal increase in 2 years. India has tripled investment over the same period. So one sees the dynamics that is like there's a pull situation in those various countries. And as an effect, it's clear that the accumulated grid connections since 2000 just skyrocketed, especially for wind, but even for solar power and green, we see that there's a large increase. While compared to 2000, the situation for nuclear power is basically stable, right? Plus 6 gigawatts. That's very small. Now I basically ate up my time. So I wanted to give a little overview of the various countries, but you will get those slides probably on the website or so. We can put this out somewhere so people can download this. So, what's the basic conclusion? Nuclear power is playing a very limited role in the overall panorama, energy panorama. It's 11% of, roughly, very difficult to calculate, approximately 11% of electricity. It's less than 5% of primary energy. And if you take into account all the losses, transformation losses, distribution losses, it's less than 2% of final energy. So the discussion whether we can do without it, it's not really a serious discussion, right? 2%, replace 2% of the world's final energy consumption is not the point. It's not the right debate. It's very clear that Fukushima has led to a situation which increases the cost, so it deteriorates further the competitiveness of nuclear power. It's not getting any better. Safety, insurance, financing, everything is getting more expensive. And obviously the problems like public opinion, the political party support is getting more complex. And an issue I have not discussed here, but which is very serious, is the maintaining competence in this area. This is not an attractive area anymore for young people. I mean, I don't know, maybe for you, but for many young people, this is not an attractive area. So the industry has very big difficulties in attracting smart young people that want to evolve in this industry. I believe that it's a huge problem, and I can only encourage young people to work on nuclear issues. I always consider you don't have to be a fanatic of nuclear power in order to think and work on these issues. Right? I also think that especially the German political decisions and the Japanese political decisions will lead to a pull effect. It's not, if two of the four major economies in the world go somewhere else, then this has an effect on other economies. You cannot just imagine that this is completely irrelevant to other countries and other major economies. This will have a pull effect, a very strong pull effect. And finally, I believe that efficiency solutions and renewables will rather continue to accelerate with more recent developments in grid systems, in hybrid concepts, and in storage possibilities that are greatly evolving. Well, thank you very much for your attention.